Thank you so much for joining us for another awesome episode of Bioenergetics Beats. I'm Heather Gray, a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and bioenergetic practitioner, and this episode is brought to you today by Nikki, Unleash the Wellness Within. It's a non-invasive, easily affordable, and highly effective approach to optimize wellness. It's a wearable device that puts frequency better based life in your hands and on your wrist. Make sure to stick around to the very end because, as usual, we have an amazing giveaway that we like to do on every episode, so you're not going to want to miss out. And as usual, you're not going to want to miss out on one thing that my next guest has to say because Dr. Sam Shay, he's absolutely incredible. He's funny. He's brilliant. You're just going to absolutely adore him as much as I do. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Shay.
Thank you, Heather. It's good to see you. And full disclosure, I'm a functional medicine practitioner, but also a stand-up comic. And the Heather and I are enjoying a stand-up comedy class. I wrangled her into joining the comedy class with me because she'll be good. I met Heather within the first 5 minutes. I was like, "Have you considered doing stand-up comedy?" And you remember that?
I looked at you like you were crazy. I was like, absolutely not ever in my life, ever, ever.
Uh, and I said, "Perfect. You'll fit right in."
So between that and the marketing class that we're in together, and then the podcast, like we've been seeing a lot of each other lately, Sam.
I know. It's only been, 48 hours since we were on the last Zoom call.
I miss you so.
Oh my God.
I digress. Anywho, I can see how this show's going to go. That's awesome.
Right.
Tell us a little bit. I know all about you, but tell us our listeners here who are new, who's Dr. Shay and why should we care? How did you get started in this? Give us a little bit of background in your schooling as well as how you got into genetics and Lyme, to begin with, because those are pretty heady, complex topics. And I, would love to know why. Why, Sam?
Sure. So my background in Lyme and genetics started very young, and I was very sick as a child. And I remember when my first memories were forming at age 6. I was extremely tired and weak, and a lot of it, I thought, in fact, all of it, I thought was due to my parents' nuclear divorce when I was 6 years old, and me and my sisters were caught in the blast radius, and they did everything wrong. Weaponized children against each other. Uh, I at least felt like it was all my fault as a 6-year-old boy because I merely existed. Like, I don't want to go through the whole harangue of how terrible it was, but it created a lot of strife in the home, a lot of gaslighting at home, and then school itself was a very torturous, violent experience, and I got no support anywhere. And what happened was that I developed crippling insomnia, severe digestive problems because I had my cholesterol checked when I was 7. It was deemed too high as a 7-year-old, and I was put on a low-fat, high-carb diet, which was loaded with pasta and bagels and like gluten hell.
Oh
Lots
my
of dairy. I
gosh.
can't believe it's not butter, and just nonsense. And it makes sense, because both my parents were psychiatrists and they didn't know anything about natural health in the 80s. And the it was just terrible. And I also developed addictions, sugar and video games to cope with the gaslighting at home and the violence at school. And then only recently I discovered that I've had Lyme my whole life. And I makes sense why I have Lyme because I went to summer camp in Maine
Mm.
for 9 summers, starting when I was 6 years old. And it was a camp where there was almost every building had no electricity. It was basically a sleepaway camp for 7 weeks in the woods. And uh, and it just explains. I don't know at what point it started, but I definitely have Lyme, and that is the most logical place I could have picked it up, and it explains a lot of these very mysterious fatigue syndromes, a joint pain, and I don't remember a tick. I don't remember a bullseye rash, even though that doesn't happen in all cases. But just literally in the woods for 7 weeks for 9 years, 9 summers. It makes total sense given also my symptomatology. So, and I was supposed to be the third generation medical doctor, but I took a hard turn into natural medicine when I realized that my parents just wanted to drug me into submission with antidepressants and in high school. And I decided I need to figure this out on my own because clearly no one's here helping me. So I have to help myself. And I did find one person of real support in high school. And then she inspired me to go look into natural medicine. And so I went through a very long circuitous training arc, starting in college doing a holistic health practitioner 800-hour certificate while still in college, and then went on to become get my doctorate in chiropractic, and then also study and get my diplomate in functional neurology, and then got an acupuncture degree when I practiced in New Zealand for 8 years, and then got very heavy into functional medicine, and particularly genetics, starting functional medicine testing in earnest in 2014, and then genetics in 2016, and haven't looked back.
How well did that go over with your parents, the medical doctors?
My mother screamed at me and told me I was wasting my life, and
Oh.
my father said it was a good idea because he disapproved of most of Western medicine in general,
Mm.
even though he was an MD, PhD himself, and that he came to that conclusion honestly because his father, Dr. Harry Shay, who was the founding director of the Fels Cancer Research Center at Temple University in 1937, and my grandfather, his father, published over 300 scientific articles in his career, and in fact revolutionized cancer research by developing the Shay rat prep, which is a murine model for breast cancer research, where he figured out a reliable way through what's called chemooncogenesis to develop breast tumors. So basically, you could take a rat and give it breast tumors reliably to then study the tumors and how to shrink them. I mean, but from a natural health standpoint, well, obviously toxins are a component to that. Why aren't we focusing on not drowning people in toxins? Therefore, you may reduce breast cancer that way, since you're literally using toxins to induce tumors. But that's neither here nor there. So, but he revolutionized a lot of research models, including duodenal ulcers, breast cancer, other things on just ulcers in general. But he died. The reason why it's relevant to the story is that he died on the operating table from medical misadventure. Um, in 1965, and sorry, 1963. He was age 65 when it happened. And my father was in his early 20s at that point. And so he's had a deep mistrust of medical procedures ever since, even though he became a medical doctor himself. So, um, he viewed my journey into natural health as certainly much safer and potentially more effective in specific situations uh, than Western medicine. But he had this very vague, hand wavy understanding of natural medicine. And basically, it was like, well, if it's not Western medicine, at least you're less dangerous. And I'm like, stick with a vote of confidence, Dad. Uh, so that's how that was received. And over time, my mother and surrounds have been much more supportive of what I'm doing. And uh, it's I've also been able to support and direct family members towards when they're open to it, to things that have been genuinely very helpful. Um, so that's kind of the short version of my academic journey, and the journey from the connection of genetics and Lyme is, I mean, uh, has been a unique fascination of mine because I'm very involved in genetics and I have Lyme, and I'm looking at what are the contributors to what are the genetic predispositions and what are the epigenetic control switches that we can flip to mitigate the effects of Lyme and help people deal with the thing about genetics is that it's an amplification, that people have certain genetic variations that amplify the negative influences of Lyme. So if we can dial down those amplification, those genetic filters that either amplify or dampen what someone's experiencing, because there's plenty of people that have Lyme but have zero symptoms, and there's multiple factors that go into that, but genetics is a major one that is hardly discussed, much less tracked in the literature. So I've got I've got the longer form part of our conversation today. I'll share some of those key genetic filters and dials that we can flip.
Absolutely. And this is a perfect spot. We're going to take a really quick break. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, we're going to dive deeper into genetics and Lyme and why it all matters and what we can do about it. And then he'll go into it and talk to us about his program in genetics that he offers, which is so flippin' exciting. Like, don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. We're going to be right back.
Every year, a walk in the woods turns into a nightmare for hundreds of thousands bitten by a tick and made victims of Lyme disease. An insect the size of a sesame seed puts life on hold with chronic pain, fatigue, fever, and brain fog. Living with Lyme is hard. Getting it diagnosed can be just as hard. Even doctors might say it's all in your head. The search for a proper diagnosis can be long, frustrating, and expensive. Lyme can mean financial ruin. Relationships suffer at home and at work. Even after diagnosis, recovery from Lyme can be far off. Lyme defies traditional medicine. More and more Lyme victims are turning to bioenergetics to get their lives back. Approaches that use the body's natural ability to heal and consider not just the body, but family history, mind, spirit, community, culture, and the environment. Bioenergetics takes healing to a cellular level. For victims who've waited so long for recovery, holistic medicine, functional medicine, and frequency delivery bring new hope. Our bodies are made up of billions of cells that communicate using frequencies. The idea of using frequencies to restore cellular function disrupted by Lyme is based on century-old science captured in a wearable device the size of a watch. Nikki's a wearable frequency delivery system designed to repair and optimize cellular function to speed recovery from Lyme. Doctors and owners are finding Nikki an effective complement to a personal Lyme recovery regimen. As warming Earth creates perfect conditions for ticks to thrive in, winning the fight against Lyme is becoming more urgent. The good news is that bioenergetic science is waging the battle against Lyme with new ideas and new products, including the Nikki Personal Frequency Delivery System. WeAreNikki.com.
Welcome back, everybody. Super excited to jump into the meat and potatoes of this one because I'm fascinated with genetics and I love the correlations that we can find with Lyme, with other diseases, find out why people are more susceptible than others to things. Like it's, I mean, I know you probably were, Dr. Shay, like with me, we've told it was in our heads and gaslit the majority of our life, and then we actually get to see this genetics. I laugh. People talk about having a detox bucket. I actually have like a detox thimble because my genetics and my detox, all of them are just absolute crap. So it's just fascinating at what I have to do differently to make sure that I work properly, but I do, right? So once you have that information, you can dial things up, dial things down. It's just fascinating. So why don't
Yeah,
you jump in?
I see your gaslighting and raise you three psychiatrists that were gaslighting. So
Right.
both my parents were gaslighting me on my symptoms, and my father is a world famous psychiatrist because he wrote two books on PTSD and moral injury and got a MacArthur Genius Award for it. And I edited a draft of his second book, which helped launch him into get that award. But the irony is that in pursuit of his career, he caused moral injury in his son. And then my personal shrink, which I am not very proud of, was the chief of Harvard Children's School Staff Psychiatry Unit at Harvard Children's Medical School. And it was one of the most useless experiences of my life for 8 years.
Oh,
Walking into his office, being told to share what was going on in my life, I share how terrible things were, felt awful, and all he would do was basically ask me if I was depressed or suicidal and ask if I wanted medication. And there's this kind of benevolent non-intervention style of psychiatry in the 80s, which I firmly believe was propagated by the pharmaceutical companies because it's all just kind of a soft sell into drugs. And all three of them, and what the hell do I know? I'm just a depressed, sad, overwhelmed, fatigued teenager. And I got these three authority figures, all with big degrees at the end of their name, telling me it's in my head. And none of them are interested in what the biological or genetic agents or predispositions are.
Absolutely. I mean, 2 stints in the psych ward for suicide attempts when I was a teenager. It's amazing. I love educating to the mental health community because really they can be that front door, that beginning diagnosis for somebody with Lyme. And we're starting to find out that it's less and less having to do with neurotransmitter issues and more having to do with toxins and brain inflammation and genetics. And I love the direction that mental health is going these days because, yeah, both, we both
And
fell through the cracks.
for fun, I was put on. I did capitulate at towards the end of high school, and I got onto Paxil, and this was in the late '90s. And Paxil was made by GlaxoSmithKline, and it turned out years later they were sued, and for however many millions and millions of dollars, which is a fraction of what they made in profit. But the Paxil was, recommended for teenagers who were having depression and potential suicide ideation. And then it turned out they were sued because they fudged the research and it did the opposite. It increased
Oh.
they increased suicidal ideation, depression. But when you read the actual lawsuit, it says it failed to have sufficient evidence for its claims, which is a very subtle way of saying it was the opposite if you have to dig a lot deeper. So, and then when I sent the articles to my parents and my shrink about like, hey, guess what? The medication you put me on was a complete fraud. Uh, None of them responded.
Oh my God.
So they're all cowards in my opinion. Uh, in terms of not being able. It was just awful. So when I talk about, and we're not going to spend the rest of this podcast, describing, kvetching about
Yep.
gaslighting, but it's just to reinforce that if you're listening to this and you're struggling with Lyme, you are not alone in being gaslit, and that it's maddening. It's absolutely maddening how one can appear normal or semi-normal on the outside, but feel half dead or mostly dead, slightly alive on the inside.
Mostly dead.
If you know that movie reference, A plus. The so I just want to share that up top, and that because I'm very committed to looking at what are the underlying mechanisms we can control around Lyme and all these other things that we're struggling with.
Awesome. Let's dig in deeper to that.
Okay, so so for those that are listening, I'm going to speak in a way that you can continue to listen, but I do have a presentation and there's going to be a link to that presentation for people to download in the notes and in the show notes. So, and this is going to be very useful for people who are very detail oriented, or if you're practitioners listening to this, if you want to get some more of the nitty gritty. So I'm going to talk today about specific genetic testing that's targeting gene variants that can epigenetically be aimed at upregulating specific genes that can point to directly at Lyme or the effects of Lyme. And the reason I bring up these fancy like epigenetic aimed at upregulating, blah, 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 basically this is saying that there are certain genes that you have a measure of control over based on lifestyle. That's what's important to know, is that there's a lot of gene tests out there that are basically creating uh, assumed assumed helplessness, like learned helplessness is the word I'm looking for. That, oh, you have this gene, you're doomed. Oh well, good luck. Bye. Here's the psychiatric drug. Instead, we're going to talk about the genes you do have a measure of control over and how they're related to Lyme. So the first one we're going to talk about is the effect of oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction. So basically, we're looking at and I'm just listing here 3 papers. We're not going to go into these papers, but it's for the nerds out there. What I did is that with support of a wonderful PhD geneticist researcher who is a part of the genetics team for the genetics program that I do. Her name is Dr. Fortuno. She's brilliant. She helped me gopher out some of these references, which are kind of obscure. But basically, from Lyme disease can cause a tremendous amount of damage to the mitochondria. And this first paper here called Lyme Inflammation, Oxidative Stress, and Mitochondrial Dysfunction, what it showed was that Lyme causes a tremendous amount of damage in the form of free radicals inside the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's the electricity factory. And the thing about an electricity factory is that you burn oxygen and fuel. In this case, it's protein, fats, and carbs plus oxygen. When you burn fuel, you make sparks, just like a campfire. And you can't have a lot of sparks because then the sparks will catch stuff on fire, like the factory. So there's enzymes called MN-SOD, which stands for manganese superoxide dismutase, that are basically like janitors that run around and put out the fires from the sparks. And Lyme creates a lot more sparks in the mitochondria. Next, we've got a paper here showing the connection of mast cells are stimulated by Lyme disease, by Burgdorferi spirochetes. And they showed a 10-fold increase in TNF alpha compared to, it's just like, they rapidly increase inflammation and histamine. And then there's another paper on TNF alpha, interleukin 6, and Lyme, and basically showing that you have Lyme, you increase your inflammation. So the reason I'm pointing these out is that these papers are pointing to Lyme and the genes, the Lyme and free radical damage, Lyme and histamine, Lyme and inflammation. So then we look at the genes that control free radical scavenging in the mitochondria. So MN-SOD is the major gene that quenches free radicals. Now, I renamed MN-SOD to Mr. SOD, like he's the head janitor of the mitochondria. And what happens in the mitochondria is you've got these free radicals, these sparks that are flying around. And the body has this very clever enzyme mechanism to take sparks and not just extinguishing them, but converting them into oxygen and water, which sounds super sci-fi-ish. Like, how's that even possible? Well, the body can do that. So you take two free radicals through Mr. SOD takes those two free radicals and then combines them into make hydrogen peroxide, the same hydrogen peroxide you'd get at a pharmacy store. And then the two junior janitors, catalase and glutathione peroxidase, combine two hydrogen peroxide molecules and make oxygen and water, which is unbelievable. Like, you actually take sparks and make oxygen and water, which is amazing. So if you have a gene variant like I do, where instead of your head janitor being a quote green dot, which is like a good version of the gene, it's not and it's like a yellow or red dot, in my case, a red dot, that means Mr. SOD is very slow and he's not able to catch all the sparks. And so I have a much bigger buildup of free radicals in my mitochondria, which explained one of the reasons why I was so tired is because I couldn't generate enough electricity in my cells because my factories were on fire from all the sparks. So now there's things that can be done to help support the head janitor and make the janitor function better. So there's certain nutrients, there's dietary changes, and that has to be taken into, what those are depends on what combination of other genes also surround it to create, people. It's not just as simple as like, oh, you have this thing, take this thing. It doesn't quite work like that. I mean, it does in certain cases, but we don't want to do is to create this illusion of magic bullet therapy that I have this gene, I need this product. That's not an appropriate way to think about genetics. You want to look at clusters of genes that are working for or against whatever environment that you're in. Now, you'll notice I said the environment, not for or against you, it's for or against the environment that you're in. So there's your genes are adapted to certain environmental types. And for people that are, say, pro-inflammatory, if you're pro-inflammatory, you're someone who is more likely to rapidly develop inflammation. So if you have Lyme disease, then Lyme increases more inflammation. And then if you have the genetics that make you more prone to accelerate or amplify the inflammatory effects, then you're going to have way more inflammation if you have Lyme than someone else who doesn't have these gene variants. So in inflammation, there's 3 types of inflammation that you can look at genetically. The rapid initiation of inflammation, the people who are quick to burn. Then there's the people who sustain or overpropagate inflammation. Those are the people that prolong the burn. And then there's people who can't put out the burn, that they can't clear it. So you can start the fire, you can keep the fire going, and then you don't have fire hoses, you got squirt guns to try to put the fire out. So if people are very pro-inflammatory and think, well, why does it make any sense? It seems very unfair. Well, I always look through a lens of evolutionary biology when in doubt, because the answers are almost always there, that if someone is hyper-inflammatory, like me, I'm very, very inflammatory genetically. If someone's hyper-inflammatory, then I'm best adapted as a frontline hunting party member of a hunting party group. So what that means is that if I'm trying to take down a giant animal and all I got is a tiny stick, it's very likely I'm going to get bit, gored, mauled, trampled, etc. But if I have a bite, what is a bite wound? A bite wound is damaging flesh plus introducing pathogens in the saliva and the oral bacteria of the animal. So inflammation rushes in there with white blood cells and red blood cells to repair the damage and kill the infection. So if I'm hyperinflammatory, I'm more likely to survive an acute injury than my less inflammatory prone hunting party members. So I'm more likely to survive in the short term at the expense of survival in the long term from complications of long-term chronic inflammatory issues, whereas the less inflammatory prone people are less likely to survive in the short term, but more likely to survive in the long term. So it's about all things trade-offs. Evolution does not give one hoot about you as an individual. It only cares about the survivability of the lineage. So it creates these variations in the progeny in order to guarantee that someone will survive, and then the genes recombine in continuing generations to continue this dice game of creating genetic variation within a shifting environment to ensure propagation of the species across the lineage. So if you're hyperinflammatory like I am, I'm in the wrong environment. I'm in the wrong environment. The modern day is not full of injuries unless you're really into specific types of sports, or you're accident prone, or you're living under the threat of a lot of violence like I did when I was growing up. And so there was the stimulation for inflammation, but then the amplification of inflammation from genes. And Lyme does this. So this explains why people can have way more pain than others who have Lyme. And I would look squarely at genes, including also other influences like toxic exposures and all these others, which can also create inflammation.
This part is absolutely fascinating because, I mean, I watch even a lot of Lyme documentaries, and I will see people just laid out, in wheelchairs, bed bound. I was in excruciating pain, but somehow I still was able to manage in life. And I still often wondered that. And so a lot of that has to do with a person's genetic makeup. It's fascinating.
Yeah, that's to me the missing. There's many variables, but the one that people are not looking at currently is genetics. There's so many variables that go into people's responses. What's your toxic load? Do you have any underlying other infections that's creating more inflammation in the gut or affecting the liver? Do you have what's your dietary reserve? What's your emotional resilience? How are your adrenals doing in terms of cortisol to mitigate inflammation? Are you properly evacuating your bowels each day and getting toxins out of your body? Do you have other physical injuries or head injuries or a bad tooth infection? Like, there's all these variables that kind of contribute to what's technically called the allostatic load, where that's the big jargonish term for just how much crap are you dealing with, emotional, physical, chemical, environmental, whatever it is. And the thing that's missing from the discussion is genetics, and is why you can have people with the exact same history, lifestyle, exposure, etc., but two very different outcomes, is because their genetics is that the genetics either dampen the negative effects or they amplify them. So we covered free radical damage. We just talked about inflammation. Now we're going to talk about methylation. Okay, methylation is a massive topic, and we're not going to cover a lot of it. We're just going to get very granular about one thing, and that's when you have Lyme, glutathione gets burned up. And one of the pathways from in the methylation pathway is called the transsulfuration pathway, where you try to get the whole point. The one methylation does lots of tons and tons of stuff, tons and tons. But there's one thing in particular that's one of the most famous things it's for is how do you get rid of homocysteine, which is this really nasty molecule in the body, and it's so nasty that the body has 3 ways to get rid of it. That's really rare to have 3 ways to get rid, like 3 separate ways. You have to get rid of this thing. So you have the folate cycle, which is the people are most know about, MTHFR. Oh my God, I got that gene. I'm screwed. Okay, that's one gene out of about a dozen and a half
Right.
methylation genes. Then there's the indirect pathway, which it goes through the pH, BHMTs, and it kind of it burns through certain nutrients very quickly. And then there's the transsulfuration or CBS pathway, which funnels homocysteine into the taurine, hydrogen sulfide, and glutathione, which is kind of cool. It's analogous to taking free radicals and converting it to oxygen and water. Well, you can take homocysteine and turn it into glutathione, which is kind of rad. So the problem the problem is that if you have problems genetically in synthesizing glutathione, particularly the GST genes. GST stands for glutathione synth. I think it's a glutathione synthase peroxide. I'm blanking on the name, but it's one of these acronyms that's hiding a much longer Scrabble winning word. If you have genetic problems generating and recycling glutathione, you're going to have way bigger problems if you have Lyme. Because generating glutathione is part of the methylation pathway. And if you just burn through your glutathione and your methylation pathway can't keep up to generate it, you're going to run into problems. So this is a connection between Lyme and methylation genes. Then the other one.
Hold on real
Sure.
quick question. So I've kind of known about that for some time, and then I was supplementing with glutathione, and I actually had a guy who looked at my genes who said, oh gosh, actually I wouldn't supplement glutathione with you. What in a person's genes would you not supplement glutathione? Like what problems could that cause?
So when people, okay, I'm aware of this debate, and this is, I'd be very concerned about someone saying you shouldn't take glutathione without looking at broader context. So when glutathione can backfire is if someone has a magnesium deficiency. So this comes directly from Dr. Lord, who invented like half of all the functional tests we use today. He's the one who invented amino acid testing, functional amino acid testing, organic acids testing. He's the one who invented the ion panel. He's the one who developed fatty acid testing for functional use. He's the one who developed the GIFX test. He's this incredible genius that he worked in, I think it was Austin or something. I forget, it was the Texas University where they were
What a
discovering.
cool name, Dr. Lord.
Dr. Lord, yeah. So he recently came out of retirement to train Dr. Kalish, who then trained me.
Ah.
Actually, it was there when Dr. Lord came out of retirement. Dr. Lord was on some of the webinars, and I was learning directly from the guy who basically invented half of all these tests. And he has a 1,200 page textbook on Apple Books. If anyone listening to this is masochistic enough to go slog through that, it's Richard S. Lord is his name. I think it's called like laboratory analysis and something. I can't remember the exact title. What he said is that there's a glutathione magnesium dyad. Laboratory Guides to Health by Richard S. Lord. That's the book. It's not a cheap book, but if you're a clinician, you probably should get it. So he said there's a magnesium glutathione dyad that when you increase your need for magnesium, you increase it goes in both directions. Like if you have magnesium but insufficient glutathione, or if you have sufficient glutathione but insufficient magnesium, you can run into trouble because you need one to help the other operate. The other thing about glutathione is that if your body is deficient in cysteine, because glutathione is composed of glycine, glutamine, and cysteine. Like that's where you hear N-acetylcysteine is useful for detox. Well, it's part of that thing of glutathione. If you're deficient in cysteine, your body can scavenge the cysteine off of glutathione for other needs. So if you're deficient in cysteine, then glutathione may not be so effective because it's being scavenged for other things. It's being broken apart. And the idea that if someone is told to not have glutathione because of a gene, I find that very strange, because unless they have a real strong reaction to it that's demonstrable, then I would be looking first at the magnesium issue and the cysteine issue. But your body makes glutathione itself. I mean, to say like you shouldn't be given glutathione because it's like it just logically, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Like, why would someone even say that? So, I mean, just because someone has the genes for uh that they've got green dots in their TCN2 and FUT2 for B12 utilizations. I mean, you don't give them B12. Well, you can actually check your functional levels.
Right.
The other thing that's missing from that genetics equation is like, okay, don't take glutathione. Really? Have you tested your glutathione levels? And then let's go there first before you deny someone one of the most important molecules in the entire human body.
Absolutely. All right, I digress. We got about 5 minutes to land the plane.
I think we can land the plane in 5 minutes.
Fabulous.
So then we got vitamin D receptors. So this one is huge. So vitamin D not so there's when people think of vitamin D, they think of, oh, just get sunshine or take some vitamin D supplements. No, that's half the journey. Getting vitamin D into the bloodstream is half the journey. Getting vitamin D from the bloodstream into the cells is the other half of the journey. That's what the vitamin D receptors are. The receptors are the things that are the ports on the surface of the cells to receive shipments of vitamin D. So if you have red dots in vitamin D receptors like I do, you are very highly prone to chronic issues. And how do I know this? Because after doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these tests, I noticed a pattern that the people who have double reds in their VDR, VDR2, or double yellows almost always have chronic issues, while the people who are green dots are just kind of cruisy and fine. Now, why is that? Is because vitamin D controls up to 3 to 5% of your entire genome, mostly related to inflammatory control and immune control. Yeah, bone density is a part of it, but it's not the biggest part of it. So I went to the chief scientist who developed the genetics test that I use and said, hey, I see a pattern. Can you check your other clinicians that see a lot of tests and check your database if there's a correlation between variations in the VDR genes and chronic disease? And he came back months later and said, you're absolutely right, there is. So, and then dug up some papers on vitamin D deficiency is closely related to higher autoimmunity and viral infections. Autoimmunity, and you've got just paper after paper here listed here. And vitamin D, the ability to use vitamin D is really fascinating. And I feel that this may be one of the big keys to people who don't respond well, who have very poor responses to Lyme. Then I think this lastly, I want to talk about liver detox.
I'm definitely one of those. Like you said, I don't detox. I mean, I don't transport, I don't make, and I don't store vitamin D also. Like all three of my pathways are broken.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I'll get people, I do a tanning bed that's got a vitamin D bulb in it. And that has been a game changer in getting up my vitamin D levels and keeping a nice sunny tan all year long.
So the slide here that I'm showing this is just listing off of the whole bunch of genes in methylation pathway just to show just how complicated it was. The last thing just to talk about was liver detox. And so with people here, that if you've got variations in your liver detox genes, you're going to have problems. Again, trying to deal with the strain on glutathione that Lyme will manifest. So that's the overview. If you've got issues, if you have genetic variations that affect your ability to deal with free radicals in the mitochondria. If you're overreactive to histamine, because if you can have a strong MCAS response in Lyme, and I mentioned it super briefly in the beginning, but there was one paper listed there. Talked a lot about inflammation, talked a lot about methylation, talked about the connection of detox and glutathione to methylation in Lyme, and then talked about vitamin D receptors. So all these things you can address these genes. I do not look at genes that you cannot influence directly.
Mm.
So that's the important thing about understanding genetics tests. You want to only get genetics tests that you can do something with. Otherwise it becomes this like learned helplessness kind of, I give up. Oh, I have this bad gene, better, whatever, just try to cope with it and turn on Netflix. So
So many people think that it's just the the nail in the casket, but really there's so much. I mean, you didn't even get into epigenetics, which is a whole nother.
that is what I'm describing is epigenetics.
Okay. Okay.
I'm describing the genetics.
Right. Right.
Epigenetics is the capacity to influence the expression of your genes. What epigenetics is, very simply, is that your genes are basically a dial, like a thermostat, like a dial. People have their thermostats are their set point is different from person to person, but you can still turn the dial. Bad lifestyle will turn you dial in the bad direction. Good lifestyle will turn the dial in the right direction. People who have better genes, they can have a worse lifestyle and have less effect. Whereas people with bad genes, they have to work harder to try to get their genes to express more like they had good genes. So like so-called red and yellow dots, which are the variations, they will never become a green dot. They will never become a good gene, but you can do lifestyle changes to make them behave more green dot like if you apply the lifestyle epigenetic changes consistently.
That's incredible. Tell us a little bit about your genetics program that you got coming up.
Absolutely. So there's a couple things I'd recommend. One is that people want like the big explanation. They can go to my website, drsamshay.com/genetics. Dr. Sam Shay spelled DRSAMSHAY.com, DRSAMSHAY.com/genetics, and you'll get a free ebook on genetics and a free mini course on genetics. And it's got stuff for the visual learners, the auditory learners, the readers, and the doers. There's a checklist on that mini course as well. And what it is the genetics program, the mini course and ebook are free, but the genetics program is for people who want to invest in their long-term health. By the way, genetics testing is the single most cost-effective test for natural health you could ever possibly do, because you do it once and the results are good for life.
Mm.
Other tests you have to keep rechecking every 6 to 12 months or so. Not genetics. It's one and done. So it's the highest value investment I believe people can do, and I can't find even a close second. What it is that I look at about 110 key genes, and the course and the program is designed to make all of those genes practical and implementable. So diet, lifestyle, nutrition. We can genetically determine optimal diet. Are you keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb genetically? What are your genetic food triggers? What are your genetic eating behaviors? So for example, some people are genetically prone to overeating, and if you find that out, doesn't mean, oh well, might as well give up. No, we don't fight your willpower, we change your environment. So we just keep the things out of reach, because genetically you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. Then we can also look at all these inflammatory genes, the free radical genes, the methylation genes, the VDR genes, and then what to do. And to have a program that you can learn how to implement these changes and have them for life. And the problem with other genetics programs is, here's your report, good luck. And
Right.
it's not organized, it's not prioritized, and it's overwhelming, and there's not a lot of support, and there's not like a video library and so on. Like I have like an office hours model, and I have a DIY model. So if people want to be in an office hours model, that's the easiest way I found to like scale access to pick my brain on genetics. And then there's a DIY model. You get the online course and the customized report and how to just implement all these things on your own. So that's the long and the short of the program, but information is available on my website.
Absolutely incredible. Also, make sure to check out wearenikki.com/podcast and enter in BioBeats for 10% off. This is one of the ways we love to deal with Lyme. And of course, adding genetics into that is just going to supercharge and speed up your healing process, right? Because we love our customers so much, we give, and to show our appreciation, we give away a Nikki on every single episode. So make sure to go to the show notes, check out Dr. Sam's links, and find out how to enter so that you can win your Nikki. Make sure to have a healthy day. And thank you, Dr. Sam, for joining us today.
Thanks, Heather.
Hi, my name's Stephen Davis, founder and developer of Nikki, a personal frequency delivery system. This wearable is designed to deliver frequencies into the body to speed recovery from Lyme disease. Our Lyme suite of frequencies are the newest version of our Lyme recovery program. Thousands of Lyme sufferers, which include my family, use the Lyme daily to overcome Lyme disease. Today, I'm proud to announce a new suite of Lyme frequency sets that are going to be focused on co-infections. Nikki is loaded with Lyme Daily, which deals with the Lyme disease, plus 9 additional frequency sets designed to address your worst co-infection symptoms. Those frequency sets include bacteria and virus, detox, emotional balance, gut health, histamine, mold and fungal, Lyme sleep, pain and stress. And we know that those are going to be well received from people with Lyme disease. We are passionate about speeding your recovery from Lyme disease. It's a terrible disease that no one should have to live with. Once you have used your Lyme Daily, then choose from the 9 frequency sets designed to offer relief from your most persistent symptoms. The key is to stick with it. Don't frequency hop until you've used the Lyme Daily. Best practice is use the other frequency sets for a minimum of 2 hours before switching to another. This is giving the frequency sets time to bring your body into balance. Good balance means good health.
There's a new word for wellness, Nikki. Nikki, the bioenergetic wearable designed to help you feel better and perform better. Other wearables just track how you're doing. Nikki is about helping you do better. Touch the Nikki screen to choose the frequency you want for what you want to do and how you want to feel. Nikki puts a personal wellness center in your hands and on your wrist. Be better. Do better. wearenikki.com. The views, information, and opinions expressed in this content are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Freemedica. Freemedica Technologies, Inc. and its employees are not responsible, nor verifies accuracy any of the information contained in the following content. The primary purpose of this content is to educate and inform. This content does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services.